Ah, Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, or the cradle of misunderstood history. Let's bust 5 Mesopotamian myths you probably still believe. Number 1. Mesopotamia was one unified civilization. When people say Mesopotamia, they often imagine one mighty empire, ruled by a wise king in a golden robe with a beard longer than your to-do list. But in reality, that's like calling all of Europe France. Mesopotamia was a region, not a single civilization. It was the land between the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, stretching across what is now mostly Iraq with parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. Instead of one grand empire, Mesopotamia was more like a revolving door of city-states and empires, constantly rising, clashing, and borrowing ideas and land from each other. Let's meet the main players. Sumerians. These were the OGs of urban civilization. They didn't just build cities, they practically invented the concept of cities. Uruk, Ur, Eridu, these places weren't just mud brick huts, they had ziggurats, think stepped pyramid-shaped temples dedicated to the gods, courts, and even plumbing. They created cuneiform writing, one of the first ever, which began as accounting tools and evolved into literature, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, aka the original Bro Wrestles with Death story. They also gave us organized religion, school systems, and bureaucracy. They were essentially the ancient office managers of history. No single state, just lots of independent city-states ruled by kings and priests. Akkadians. Enter Sargon of Akkad, a former cupbearer who decided to become the world's first emperor. He united many Sumerian cities under the Akkadian Empire, the first large-scale empire in recorded history. The Akkadians adopted much of Sumerian culture, but spread their Semitic language across the region. Sargon's empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. Impressive, but short-lived. After about a century, internal collapse and invasions brought it down. We still don't know where Akkad was, by the way. So, great branding, unclear location. Babylonians. Fast forward to the rise of Babylon, under rulers like the famous Hammurabi, best known for his law code, aka don't steal, don't lie, and definitely don't build a collapsing house. Because if your house collapses and kills someone, it's your fault. Weird. But why not after all? Babylon became a center of science, astronomy, and literature. It wasn't always an empire. Sometimes it was just a powerful city-state. But it played a major cultural role across centuries, and when it fell, it came back, and we'll see that later. Assyrians. These were the militarized powerhouses of the north. From Ashur to Nineveh, the Assyrians turned conquest into an art form, complete with siege engines, mass deportations, and yes, terrifying psychological warfare. They ruled one of the largest empires in the ancient world at their peak, around 700 BCE. They built libraries, like the famous one at Nineveh, mapped the stars, and kept records on clay tablets so future archaeologists could find receipts from 2,700 years ago. But they were also ruthless. Neighboring states dreaded them until the Babylonians and Medes finally sacked Nineveh in 612 BCE. Neo-Babylonians, or Chaldeans. After the fall of Assyria, Babylon rose again, this time under the Chaldeans, in what we call the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Their most famous ruler? Nebuchadnezzar II, builder of grand temples, fortifications, and possibly the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, if they actually existed. We'll get to that in a few minutes. This era saw a cultural renaissance. Advances in math, astronomy, and religious texts flourished. But like many empires, it didn't last. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia rolled in and ended it all, with surprisingly little resistance. So, was it unified? Not even close. These civilizations shared cultural DNA, cuneiform, religion, ziggurats, astrology, but politically, they were separate. Sometimes friendly, sometimes blood enemies. Mesopotamia was a cultural zone, not a single state. It's more accurate to think of it as a shared ancient neighborhood where different civilizations spoke the same architectural and religious language, but often fought over who got to be in charge. Number 2, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were a massive garden built in the sky. Ah yes, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Lush, magical, gravity-defying greenery floating in the air like a scene out of a fantasy movie. Vines dangling from the heavens, exotic flowers blooming in the clouds. Sounds dreamy, right? But here's the less poetic truth. There's a decent chance the Hanging Gardens weren't even in Babylon. That's right. Despite being listed as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, historians have never actually found solid archaeological evidence of their existence in Babylon. Ancient texts describe them in impressive detail, but the location and even the very existence of the gardens is still a mystery. In fact, some modern scholars believe the whole thing may have been a case of mistaken identity. There's a theory that the gardens were actually in Nineveh, the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and not Babylon at all. The Assyrian king Sennacherib bragged about building elaborate terraced gardens with advanced irrigation systems. And unlike the Babylon theory, we actually have archaeological ruins and written records to support that claim. And what about the word hanging? It might not mean floating in midair, like some sort of ancient plant-based UFO. It likely comes from the Greek word kremastos, or the Latin pensilis, which can also mean overhanging or terraced. So instead of vines dangling from magical sky platforms, think of multi-level gardens climbing up a structure, like a giant green wedding cake, not a vertical Eden. So, were the hanging gardens real? Possibly. But were they a cloud-scraping miracle in Babylon? Probably not. Number 3. The Mesopotamians created the first written laws, and Hammurabi's code was the very first. When people think of ancient laws, Hammurabi's code is usually the first thing that pops up. Carved into a giant black stone and featuring that iconic eye for an eye justice system, it's often taught as the first written legal code in human history. But here's the twist. Hammurabi didn't actually invent the idea of written law. In fact, Sumerians, those early innovators of writing, city life, and bureaucracy, beat him to it by several centuries. One of the oldest known law codes is the Code of Ur-Namma, dating back to around 2100 BCE, well before Hammurabi's time. It laid out rules about marriage, theft, and punishment, though a bit less eye for an eye and more about fines and reparations. There's also the Lipit Ishtar Code from around 1930 BCE, which covered similar civil matters and was used in the city of Isin. These early codes were often less harsh than Hammurabi's and reflected more local and communal legal customs. So why is Hammurabi's code so famous? Well, it was incredibly detailed, with no less than 282 laws, written in Akkadian for everyone to understand and publicly displayed, literally carved into a massive stele for all to see. It was a legal flex, a royal PR move, and a message. Look how fair and organized my kingdom is. Still, credit where credit is due. Hammurabi didn't invent law. He just wrote the flashiest version that managed to survive thousands of years. Number 4. The Sumerians invented the wheel for joyrides and chariots. When you hear, the wheel was invented in Mesopotamia, your brain might instantly picture Sumerians cruising around in wooden convertibles, waving to the neighbors in Ur. But hold your oxen. That's not how it started. Yes, the Sumerians, around 3500 BCE, did invent the wheel, but their first version wasn't strapped to wagons or war chariots, and it wasn't a single light bulb moment either. It was more of a slow, clever evolution. Early Mesopotamians were already using rollers, logs placed under heavy objects, to move things across short distances. Over time, someone had the brilliant idea to attach those rollers to a fixed platform and add a rotating mechanism. Enter the potter's wheel, used to shape clay into pots, bowls, and the occasional ceremonial mug. So the wheel's first gig? Arts and crafts. It wasn't until a few hundred years later that people had the eureka moment and slapped wheels onto carts for transport. That leap in innovation likely required a mix of technical know-how, stronger axles, and someone really sick of dragging stuff through the mud. So yeah, the Sumerians didn't invent wheels for joyrides. They just wanted better pottery without breaking their backs. Number 5. The Babylonians were the first to invent the 7-day week. When you're staring down another Monday morning with a coffee in one hand and existential dread in the other, you might be tempted to blame the Babylonians. After all, they're behind plenty of the math and time systems we still use today. 60-minute hours, 24-hour days, and even the 360-degree circle. So of course, they came up with the week, right? Not quite. While the Babylonians were mathematical masterminds, especially with their love of base 60 calculations, the 7-day week actually has deeper, more spiritual roots. And it didn't start with Babylon. The concept of a 7-day cycle is more directly tied to ancient Hebrew traditions, particularly the Book of Genesis, where the world was created in 6 days and the 7th was a day of rest. This religious structure influenced Jewish calendar systems, which predate the widespread Babylonian use of the 7-day week. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When the Babylonians came into contact with other cultures, especially during and after the Babylonian captivity of the Jews in the 6th century BCE, There was a cultural cross-pollination of ideas, including calendrical systems. The Babylonians did adopt the 7-day week structure eventually, aligning it with their astrological beliefs. Each day was named after one of the 7 celestial bodies visible to the naked eye: the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. So, yes, the Babylonians helped spread the 7-day week and gave it that cosmic flair. But they didn't exactly invent it. They were more like excellent marketers of a pre-existing idea, adding a planetary twist. But wait, what did they invent? A lot, actually. The Babylonians divided hours and degrees in circles based on the number 60, a system that still haunts school children in math class today. Their astronomical charts were some of the most detailed of the ancient world. They were brilliant at organizing time and space, just not the ones who doomed us to work 5 days and rest for 2. If you love busting ancient myths, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and tell me in the comments which civilization should we expose next.